It started the way most neighborhood disputes do, not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with silence. An unsettling, deliberate silence that grew heavier with every passing day. For months, the narrator had tried to keep things civil. The neighbor next door, known among residents simply as Karen, seemed impossible to approach. She was the type who peeked through curtains whenever a delivery truck passed, who reported grass growing half an inch too tall, who measured fence height with a tape measure and took photos for evidence. At first, the narrator found her quirks amusing. Every neighborhood had one like her, a self-appointed guardian of suburban peace. But what began as mild irritation quickly evolved into a battle of patience, and eventually, quiet hostility that started when the narrator installed a small garden bed near the property line, a few decorative stones, low succulents, nothing extravagant. Within 2 days, an anonymous letter arrived. It wasn't signed, but the tone was unmistakable. Property lines exist for a reason. You're encroaching on mine. Fix it before I contact the HOA. The letter was written in neat, looping handwriting, the kind only someone meticulous, or obsessive, would use. Trying to be kind, the narrator moved the garden stones inward, even though the property survey confirmed everything was within bounds. But that gesture wasn't enough. Karen began her campaign of silent disapproval. Every time the narrator walked outside, her blinds would twitch. When the lawnmower roared to life, her door would open, and she'd step out with folded arms, glaring across the yard as if the very act of maintaining one's property was a personal offense. Then came the petty reports. The HOA letters arrived like clockwork, complaints about unsightly trash cans, excessive watering, even lights left on past curfew. Each accusation was trivial, but each one carried that same tone of self-righteous authority. The narrator knew exactly who was behind them. Still, he chose peace. He smiled when passing her driveway, waved once or twice, even offered a friendly "good morning" on occasion. She never responded. Her lips tightened, her eyes narrowed, and she turned away. For a while, the silence was manageable. But it took its toll. Friends stopped visiting because parking near Karen's home meant risking a report to the HOA. Deliveries went missing, small packages that tracking confirmed were delivered, but mysteriously vanished before being retrieved. One morning, the narrator found muddy footprints leading up to his porch, as if someone had walked right up to his front door in the middle of the night. That he began to record small clips from his security camera, nothing serious, just in case. But every time he reviewed the footage, he caught the same sight: Karen, pacing near the boundary, occasionally stopping to stare into the camera before turning away. She wasn't trespassing. She wasn't saying anything. She was simply there. Watching. Weeks passed. The stress of it all began to bleed into everyday life. He tried again to make peace, writing a brief note to leave in her mailbox. It wasn't confrontational, just a neighborly gesture saying, "If there's an issue, please let's talk about it." The note was never acknowledged. Instead, the next morning, it was pinned to his own door with a thumbtack, folded neatly, the words, "Do not approach me again," scrawled across the top in red ink. That was the moment everything changed. No more attempts at diplomacy. No more letting her hostility dictate the tone of the neighborhood. The narrator decided it was time to turn her obsession with surveillance against her. He bought a drone. At first, it was a simple gadget, a mid-range camera drone meant for casual photography. But soon, it became something more. With each flight, he learned the drone's range, speed, and camera angles. He didn't cross property lines. He didn't invade privacy. Everything he did was within the legal limits of drone operation, carefully studied and recorded. The first few flights were harmless. The drone hovered over his own yard, scanning the landscape. He noticed how Karen reacted. The moment she heard the faint hum of the propellers, she'd appear. Her door would creak open, her head would tilt upward, and she'd glare at the small object floating in the air. Her disapproval was almost tangible. Then came the day she tried to confront him indirectly. A letter from the HOA arrived again, this time, claiming aerial disturbances were disrupting the peace. The narrator laughed when he read it. There was no rule against drone use, and the HOA knew it. The complaint had been filed under public nuisance, but it lacked evidence, and so, he kept flying, but this time, he had a purpose. If she refused to communicate face-to-face, then the drone would do it for him. Not through words, but through presence. He attached a small LED screen beneath the drone's body, nothing large, just enough to display a few scrolling words. The first message was simple: "Can we talk?" When he sent the drone hovering above his yard, facing hers, the message glowed softly in the dusk. Karen stepped out, looked up, and froze. Her expression was unreadable: shock, anger, confusion. She stood there for nearly a minute, then turned abruptly and stormed inside. The next day, another letter arrived. No signature, just one line typed on plain paper: "This is harassment." The narrator smiled. If asking for communication was harassment, then perhaps she needed to learn the true definition of persistence. He upgraded the drone, added stabilizers, brighter LEDs, and a camera capable of recording in high definition. Each flight became a ritual. The drone would rise silently into the air, drift toward the boundary, and hover, never crossing the invisible line of legality, but always present. The message changed each time. "Why won't you talk? Let's resolve this. Ignoring doesn't make it go away." Neighbors began to notice. Some found it amusing, others found it concerning. But none could deny that Karen, for once, was the one being watched. The power dynamic had shifted. Then one night, it escalated. At around 9 p.m., the narrator launched the drone again, this time to capture footage of her backyard, strictly from his side, within regulation. The camera picked up faint movement near the edge of her fence. A flashlight beam flickered once, then disappeared. When he zoomed in, he saw Karen crouched by the property line, examining something near his garden bed. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he recorded, the next morning, there was a shallow hole where one of the plants used to be. A perfect circle of disturbed soil. She had crossed the line, literally this time. That's when the narrator knew it was time for the drone to speak louder. He didn't plan to confront her in anger. No shouting, no police reports. Just evidence, and a message she couldn't ignore. He programmed the drone for one final flight that evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the soft hum of its blades rose once again above the quiet neighborhood. This time, the LED screen didn't ask a question. It displayed one clear sentence: "I saw what you did." From behind her curtain, Karen looked up, her face illuminated by the eerie glow of the drone's message. For the first time, she seemed afraid, and as the drone hovered, silent and steady, the balance of power shifted completely. That was the night the silent war turned into something else entirely, because the next morning, Karen's window was shattered, and the drone footage revealed something no one expected. The morning after the shattered window, the neighborhood buzzed like a disturbed hive. The sound of gossip traveled faster than the drone ever could. By sunrise, everyone seemed to know Karen's window was broken, and whispers filled the cul-de-sac. Some said kids had done it. Others believed it was retaliation. But those who really knew Karen, those who had seen the months of silent battles and HOA letters, had their suspicions. For the narrator, the discovery was unexpected. He hadn't touched a thing, hadn't even left his property. But when he reviewed the drone footage from the previous night, something didn't add up. The recording showed the drone hovering steadily above his yard at 9:07 p.m., its camera angled toward Karen's side. The LED message, "I saw what you did," glowed faintly against her house. Karen stood near her window, glaring. Then she vanished inside. For the next minute, the feed showed nothing unusual, until a small, sharp flicker of motion caught the camera's periphery. A flash of reflected light. Then, the window cracked. The drone didn't capture what caused it, just the sound, the sudden shattering, and the brief silhouette of Karen's face lit by her own porch light. The narrator paused the footage again and again, replaying every frame. No thrown object, no movement from his side. He knew what this meant. The timing, the angle, the coincidence, it all pointed to one conclusion: Karen had done it herself. Perhaps she wanted sympathy. Perhaps she wanted proof to back her endless complaints. Or perhaps, in her escalating paranoia, she thought breaking her own window would frame him. By noon, a police cruiser rolled into the street. The blue lights flickered softly as the officer stepped out and walked straight to Karen's house. From behind his blinds, the narrator watched. She gestured wildly, waving toward his property. The officer nodded, took notes, then made his way across the lawn toward the narrator's front door. He opened the door calmly, already anticipating the conversation. The officer was polite but direct. A complaint had been made: property damage, harassment, flying devices causing distress. The narrator didn't argue. Instead, he led the officer to his computer, queued up the drone footage, and pressed play. 10 minutes later, the officer was gone. No charges, no warnings, just a quiet nod and a remark about staying within regulations. But the look on Karen's face as the cruiser pulled away said everything. Her attempt had failed. From that day, her behavior changed. The woman who had once been obsessed with control now seemed unhinged by its loss. The blinds no longer twitched, they were drawn permanently shut. Her yard, once immaculate, began to wither. Trash cans lingered by the curb for days. The perfect symmetry of her flower beds fell apart. It was as if her entire world had cracked alongside that window. But even as her silence grew heavier, the narrator couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was brewing beneath it. 3 days later, a notice appeared in his mailbox, not from the HOA this time, but from the county. It was a formal complaint requesting investigation into unauthorized surveillance. The accusation cited invasion of privacy and use of technology for intimidation. The complainant was anonymous, but he didn't need to guess twice. Karen had found a new angle of attack. He spent the next few evenings researching local drone laws, combing through ordinances, confirming every clause. The regulations were clear: as long as the drone operated below 400 feet over his property and not used for commercial surveillance, it was entirely legal. He'd been cautious from the start, anticipating this very move, but the real problem wasn't legality, it was perception. Karen had painted him as the neighborhood menace. The HOA board called for an emergency meeting to discuss disruptive technologies. Neighbors avoided eye contact. One even muttered under their breath that, "It's creepy, man, filming people's houses." The irony burned. The woman who'd watched everyone for years now played the victim of being watched herself. Instead of fighting the gossip, the narrator decided to embrace it, but on his own terms. He uploaded one of the drone clips online, trimming out identifying details, and titled it, "My HOA neighbor thinks she owns the sky." The video went viral almost overnight. Thousands of comments poured in, some mocking Karen's overreaction, others debating drone laws, but most siding with him. That validation felt intoxicating. After months of isolation and hostility, he finally had a voice louder than her letters, but victory has a way of breeding consequences. Within a week, Karen's house became a spectacle. Strangers began driving by, curious to see the drone lady from the viral clip. Some slowed down to film. Others honked. One even left a cardboard drone on her lawn with the words, "Smile for the camera." The neighborhood, once pristine and quiet, turned chaotic. Cars idled late at night. Teenagers laughed outside her fence. And from behind those drawn blinds, Karen watched her kingdom crumble. Then, one night, she snapped. The narrator heard the sound first, metal scraping against concrete. When he looked out, he saw her silhouette dragging something large across her driveway. The faint streetlight revealed the shape of a ladder. She propped it against his fence, climbed halfway, and started shouting, not words, just raw anger echoing across the still night. He didn't move. Didn't respond. He simply launched the drone, the propellers whirred to life, the faint hum rising like a warning. Karen froze halfway up the ladder, squinting into the night as the small machine lifted off. Its red lights blinked steadily as it hovered in front of her, silent but unmistakable. Then the LED screen lit up again, one message scrolling in slow, deliberate rhythm, "You're being recorded." She froze, her expression collapsing into a mask of rage and fear. For a long, tense moment, she didn't move. Then she climbed down, grabbed the ladder, and stormed inside. That was the last time anyone saw her outside during daylight. For days, the house remained dark. Mail piled up. Her trash bins overflowed. The silence that followed wasn't the cold, calculated quiet of before. It was the kind that hinted at retreat, or perhaps defeat, but the narrator couldn't shake an unease creeping at the back of his mind. The situation had escalated beyond control, and even though he hadn't broken a single rule, it felt as though something had been set in motion, something irreversible. He decided to stop flying the drone for a while, to let things cool down. But just as the neighborhood began to settle, something happened that made him realize the conflict wasn't over, it was only changing form. Late one night, as he sat reviewing his past footage, the monitor flickered. A new file had appeared in the drone's storage, time-stamped that very evening. He hadn't flown the drone that night. The feed began abruptly, shaky and low to the ground, moving through his backyard toward his porch, and then, for a brief second before the video cut out, the camera tilted upward, capturing Karen's face in the darkness, staring directly into the lens, her eyes reflecting the drone's faint red lights. The sight of her face staring into the drone's lens haunted him long after the footage ended. There was something unnatural about it, her expression not one of anger this time, but cold calculation. The eyes, unblinking and pale in the low light, seemed to hold the same intensity as when she used to glare through her curtains. But this time, it was different. She had crossed into his world, the one she used to despise. For the first time, he felt genuine fear. The drone had a secure control system. It wasn't connected to the cloud, wasn't synced to Wi-Fi. It required physical input, a manual controller with a unique signal ID. The idea that someone had flown it without his knowledge was almost impossible. Almost. Because if she had somehow managed to clone the signal, or tampered with the drone while he wasn't looking, she could have done exactly that. The next morning, he inspected the drone closely. No external damage, no missing screws, no signs of forced entry into the battery compartment. But the SD card had been removed and reinserted. A faint scratch near the port, small but noticeable, confirmed his fear. Someone had handled it. Karen. The paranoia began to build, seeping into every corner of his routine. He started locking the drone inside a small safe, checking his security cameras twice a night, glancing toward her house whenever a sound echoed outside. The neighborhood felt different now, like a stage where every curtain hid an audience, every shadow concealed movement. 3 nights later, the silence broke again. At exactly 2:14 a.m., his phone buzzed with a motion alert from the backyard camera. He opened the app and froze. The live feed showed the faint silhouette of a person standing in the middle of his yard. Not moving. Not trying to hide. Just standing. He enhanced the image, heart pounding. It was her. Karen stood barefoot in the grass, wearing what looked like a nightgown, her hair wild, her face ghostly under the floodlight. In her hand, she held something small and blinking, his drone controller. The footage cut out abruptly. He ran to the back door, but by the time he stepped outside, she was gone. The only trace left was a trail of flattened grass and a small note pinned to his fence with a gardening stake. The paper was damp with dew, but the message was still legible, written in her precise, looping handwriting. You don't control the sky anymore. It was the moment he realized this had spiraled far beyond petty neighborhood games. What had started as silent hostility and legal drone flights had turned into psychological warfare. He filed a police report the next morning. The officer, the same one who had come weeks earlier, listened patiently, reviewed the footage, and nodded sympathetically. But without physical proof of theft or damage, there wasn't much they could do. Just stay cautious, the officer said, and maybe, stop engaging. But stopping wasn't that easy. The drone had become more than a gadget. It was his proof, his defense, his voice against her manipulation. And now that she had touched it, invaded it, there was no going back. That evening, he decided to reclaim control once and for all. He charged the batteries, wiped the SD card, and double-checked the connection logs. Every light blinked green. It was working perfectly again. Before launching it, he mounted a second camera on his porch to record both the takeoff and the operator, so that if anything went wrong, there'd be proof he was behind the controls. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he sent the drone into the air one final time. The familiar hum filled the quiet street. The camera stabilized, the lights flickered, and the world below came into focus. Karen's house looked darker than ever. The blinds were drawn, the porch light off. But as the drone hovered higher, the infrared mode picked up movement inside, shadows shifting near the window, slow and deliberate. Then, the front door opened. She stepped out. For the first time, she didn't look angry or frightened. She looked calm, detached. In her hands, she held something small, his spare drone controller. The one he'd lost weeks ago. Then, the feed glitched, the drone twitched midair, its stabilizers spinning erratically. The screen displayed a connection warning, signal interference detected. He tried to regain control, adjusting the joysticks, resetting the link, but it was no use. The drone began to drift, slowly, steadily, toward her house. He watched in disbelief as it hovered directly above her driveway. Karen looked up, smiling faintly. For a moment, the LED screen on the drone flickered to life, but this time, it wasn't his programmed text. It was hers. Now I'm watching you. The drone tilted forward sharply, dove toward the ground, and crashed into her yard. The feed went black. He stood frozen in front of the monitor, the sound of static filling the room. Seconds later, a new video file appeared in the folder, timestamped that exact minute. Trembling, he opened it. The footage wasn't from his perspective. It was from the drone, but recorded after it had fallen. The camera lay sideways in the grass, showing her feet as she approached. Then, her voice, cold, steady, almost whispering, broke the silence. "You think I didn't know? I've been recording you too." The file ended there. That was the last footage the drone ever captured. The next day, her house was empty. The blinds were gone, the furniture cleared, the yard stripped bare. A "for sale" sign stood crooked in the soil, swaying lightly in the breeze. No one had seen her move out. No moving trucks, no noise, no farewells. Just gone. The HOA claimed she had sold the property quietly, transferring ownership through a legal agent. But when he checked public records weeks later, the sale didn't exist. The address was listed under private holding. He never saw her again, but sometimes, late at night, when the wind was still and the streetlights flickered, he swore he could hear the faint hum of propellers somewhere above his house, slow, deliberate, circling, and every time he checked the sky, it was always the same, nothing visible, just that soft, distant sound. He stopped using drones after that. Packed them away, deleted his footage, tried to forget. But one morning months later, he received a package with no return address. Inside was a small SD card and a folded note. The handwriting was neat, looping, and painfully familiar. "You don't control the sky anymore." "I do." He never opened the card. He never needed to. From that day forward, he made sure to keep his curtains closed, just like Karen used to, because now, he understood what she had always known. In a neighborhood built on control, it only takes one silent watcher to make everyone afraid of looking up.